Invoking jihad, now someone has been counting when I use the word complicated. It's complicated. But it's not as complicated as you think. Okay? Jihad per se doesn't mean qital, but jihad as an institution, which should have been called qital, has rules, and it has rules of engagement, and it cannot be invoked by a fatwa, especially a fatwa from a person who is not qualified to give the fatwa. Because there are even definitions of who can give a fatwa. Well, Osama bin Laden, as an example, is not qualified to give a fatwa. So even if he said it, it will have no legitimacy. So the declaration of jihad must come from a ruler, either in self-defense, or they have been invaded, or the practice of religion is being restricted, and things of that kind. And which brings us to, so how about jihad in modern times? And some of these arguments are not mine, they are Sherman Jackson's, and I don't totally agree with it because I think some of the institutions that are being named I don't think are effective, but nevertheless they exist. But just because they exist doesn't mean that it restricts the need for jihad, but someone moderates it. So it is difficult to justify jihad in modern times for the following reasons. A state of truce more or less exists in the world, except when the big powers go and invade countries and try to change, engage in changing the governments and so on. So yes, now I'm editorializing in what I'm saying. So a state of truth more or less exists, and the peace exists among all nations. But I'm kind of giving it my slant. That is theoretical, because the United Nations that this thing is referring to, I think it's ineffective, and it doesn't have the teeth. The Social Security Council is dominated by 5 nations, even though they have added these pretend other members. But the big powers, which now it actually is only one, the others are minor players. They can do whatever they want. But in theory, there is a state of truce that exists. Muslims are free to practice their religion in most countries. Okay? And what they cannot practice are peripheral issues, such as the states who will say, well, you cannot use hijab. Well, there are Muslim states that say that too. So you cannot say, well, it's the non-Muslim states that are preventing Muslims from wearing hijab. So in general, I think Muslims can practice their religion almost everywhere. As a matter of fact, Muslims are freer to practice their religion in non-Muslim democratic states than in many of their own states, or the majority Muslim states, where it is restricted. So Muslims are free to practice their religion in most countries. Mechanisms are available to negotiate disagreements among nations, because remember, it can be declared only by, unfortunately, what we call states. Now, whether they succeed easily or not is a different issue, but the mechanisms do exist. Modern war technology makes it impossible to obey rules of engagement laid out by the Prophet. And I've kind of added this is mine. And the reason is the older I get, the more I've convinced myself that the modern warfare is evil and illegal and cannot be justified. And this is back from Jackson's arguments that it is for the United Nations to take the lead. He's kind of pleading with the United Nations and the United States to take the lead to prevent further bloodshed. Okay, any other questions? That the jihad in modern times is very, very difficult to justify, the old institution of jihad. Any questions?
Just wondering.
Yes.
Talk about loss of life, and bloodshed was, you said, on the final bullet point. Doesn't in some ways modern warfare reduce bloodshed as opposed to like the Civil War or Napoleonic warfare where you're lining up on a battlefield and shooting indiscriminately?
Well, I mean, that's the argument of those who want to use drone attacks. What it does is it reduces the bloodshed on one side, the one who's aggressing. But it actually has disproportionately increased the deaths on the other side, the people you don't see, you can target people. I mean, the total numbers probably have decreased, perhaps, but the balance is that more innocent people proportionately are killed. Now, what is not happening is what happened in the Second World War, where mainly the Allies killed hundreds and thousands of people in one night, as an example, or in one city, and by saying, well, these are non-combatants, but these are all war factories. Terminology was created where, well, this is collateral damage. Well, the collateral damage doesn't wash, because you shouldn't be killing people where you don't know by seeing the white of their eyes as to who you are killing. So collateral damage happens because we are indiscriminately attacking. And I know the complication because we normally have someone on the ground who says, yeah, we know where these people, they are over here. So follow my voice. But of course, well, there are problems, and we can discuss that. So what you are saying is right, but except the balance has shifted where it reduces the number of people on the attacker's side, but the number of people killed who are being attacked is still disproportionate. Yes.
So is there a way, because I don't think stuff like drone attacks and massive bombings are going to stop because it gives one side a tremendous advantage. Is there a way for the rules of engagement to evolve, or should they? Because it's nice to be able to say that the modern warfare is illegitimate, but I don't think it's going to change. So what can people do to defend themselves following rules of engagement in a legitimate way?
I don't know, which is why I take the position that says the modern war is totally immoral, unethical, and should not happen. So we should be spending all our energies in arguing against it and not try to legitimize it in any way whatsoever. So yes, it is difficult, but I think I believe it's the more moral stand. Will it continue? Well, I think that's fatalistic. That says, because we are citizens of these countries that are engaging in these killings, and us as citizens saying, well, it's not going to stop. Well, they are our rulers. We elect them. Why can't we take the position that says modern warfare is unethical and cannot be legitimized? Yes.
It seems like the technology of warfare in the past, and because in the past you only fought people who were next to you, there was something, more humane, to use a strange word, about war. You fought people that you knew, and when you killed them, you saw that you were killing them in their eyes. Today, technology it's just a push of a button, and they're just numbers. Your victims are numbers rather than other human beings, and so.
Well, actually, even before this pushing the button came, as soon as we mechanized it, you will have the airplanes, and they come. They don't really see who is on the ground. And even though in those days, in the earlier days, you would swoop down before you could bomb, because dropping the bombs from a higher elevation in those days, you didn't know where they will end, because the technology of zeroing in and so on was not there. So it began there, and bombing of cities and so on, happened massively. The 20th century was the most brutal century in the history of humanity. Well, actually, even though they didn't use the word God, but in a way, you did. Are you familiar with Gott mit uns, God is with us terminology? Google that and find out who used it. Hitler's soldiers' buckle belt said, Gott mit uns. Okay? They were fighting. God is with us. Anyone you kill is okay. So they were, even though they were not directly invoking religion, they were invoking that God is with them. And Gott mit uns is, it's not just with Hitler, because it goes way back. And if you go there, there's a whole industry that actually sells those buckle belts or other trinkets that has in Gott mit uns everywhere. And Mustafa, well, I don't want to go on other tangents, but people have invoked God on all sides in doing it, even during the Second World War. And then, the argument, well, we are doing this because it will reduce the number of people killed. Okay? So, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that argument that is still in our textbooks, and we buy it, it's, I shouldn't use the word bunk from where I'm standing, but it's bunk, it's nonsense.